Thank you. Good to be here with you guys this morning. We're going to talk about measuring church vitality. So the charts you normally see show our growth. Baptisms, profession of faith, you can definitely see where COVID put a dent in that. We're not quite back to pre-COVID, but close. And you notice that the graph that flattened in 2019 to 2021 is starting to creep up just a little more. But these graphs, there's a story hiding behind there. So we wanted to dive in, and as Jose said, we wanted a way to see if we couldn't measure church vitality. So we thought we would follow the doctors, right? I just went to the doctor on Monday, left the meeting here, went to visit a doctor. First thing they do, height, weight, blood pressure, right? Now, he's a rheumatologist, so it doesn't tell him anything about rheumatism or arthritis, but it does give him a hint that there's something that we need to look into. So take this in that spirit. Typical indicators for church vitality are attendance, baptisms, and contributions. I learned that from my friends in church growth. And so I said, well, we've got all the baptisms for all the churches in North America going back to at least 2008. Every conference has been on eAdventist since 2008. We have a growing number that are recording attendance. We don't have contributions. Unfortunately, nobody collects the contribution information anywhere. It's kind of siloed at the conferences. So we're building buckets into eAdventist. That's pretty much complete, and we'll be announcing that later this year, where you can put in your yearly totals for tithe and church offering. So it won't be any details about people, but it'll help you assess the church. So, as Jose mentioned, the standard that we're using comes out of eHuddle. The discussion started in 2020, and we came to a conclusion in 2021. This is a summary of what he said. Notice, declining is an or, not an and. All you need to do to step from declining to plateauing is increase your attendance. Well, don't decrease by more than 2% or just baptize one person. So let's dive in. The study you will probably see the most on the churches in general, is the Faith Communities Today. They've done it every 5 years over a period of the last 20 years. And so we'll just compare ourselves to that a little bit just to show you. What they did is they used 5% as their break point for growing or declining, but they did it over 3 years. So we do 2% over 1 year, 5% over 3 years. So fairly similar. And for those of you who may be looking at the slides later, these are our definitions. When we say a congregation, we mean a church or a company, a baby church. Baptisms, we mean baptisms or professions of faith. And the NPUC is the only part of the North American division that has really tracked attendance that of all the ones we've talked to. For the last 10 years, they've done a somewhat rigorous attendance collection. And we found that, as Jose mentioned, best conferences in their best years, about 47% of membership attend. Worst conferences in their worst years, about 39%. So to be conservative, any church that didn't record attendance, we estimated 40% of their membership. It's not as good of an indicator as attendance, but it is definitely closer than no indicator at all. And when we say church plant, we mean mission group. That's what a lot of people call them. All right. So almost half the churches in North America have been recording attendance in eAdventist this year. Just want to say, after watching the pandemic, churches that don't record attendance are like doctors that don't take notes. Care is still being given, but when you switch doctors or when you're in charge of the clinic, it's really hard to know what's going on. All right, being the geek in the room, I need to just share one quick thing with you, take you quickly back to your last statistics class. When we compare church sizes, we talk about mean and median, which seems nitpicky. Mean is the mathematical center. We add up all the heights, we divide by the number of people. There might be nobody that height, but it's the mathematical center. Median is when we line everybody up, shortest to tallest, and then we take the person in the center, okay? So with that in mind, Here's the size of congregations. So churches and companies in North America. The mean, the mathematical center, is 187. The median, the center of the lineup, is 106. So that means that on this last weekend, half of our congregations were 106 or smaller. The other half of our congregations were larger. The fact that the mean is so much above the median tells you that we've got some really big congregations that do pull it up. And just to give you an idea of the breakdown, interesting discussions come out of showing these slides to groups like you guys. Dave Gemmell said, I wonder how many of their members we're talking about. So half the congregations are 106 or smaller. That's 1/10 of our members. 1 out of every 10 members attends a very small congregation. 9 out of 10, not a big surprise, but just helpful to know. So here's the distribution of the size of our congregations. Clearly a lot in the 1 to 200 size. Surprisingly, quite a few in the hundreds, up to 1,000. Notice the 600 to 999. All right, let's dive into the actual statistics. So we started in 2017 because that's where our attendance data was probably the most solid. And this is what we found. Half of the churches in North America were in the declining category, a third were in the growing, and about a sixth are in plateauing. And it turns out multiplying was a much higher bar to hit than a lot of people thought. We had 33. We have since discovered that there are some churches that did hit that mark, but they have not been connecting the group to the mother church. I've been talking to a couple of you guys from some of the conferences. As we get that fixed, this number may climb a little, but not a lot. Most of that is in there solid. So watch, 2017, 2018, 2019, boom. Now, that's not great news, but on the other hand, it is good news. If you have a gauge on your car that's supposed to tell you how you're doing, and the engine starts smoking and making noise, and the gauge looks good, you've got a problem, right? So at least we know our gauge is working. If your church is locked down, you better have something changing on the gauge. Surprisingly, about a sixth of our churches still managed to hit growing, and 19 managed to hit multiplying. Creativity came into play, just like barbers that couldn't have their barber shops started coaching people over Zoom. I mean, better to have a barber coached haircut than a DIY one, right? And churches started doing the same thing. We had baptisms that were done by Zoom, right? 2021, hey, we're starting to bounce back. And here's 2022, which we've just been able to do. Small grain of salt. The fact that attendance worked and took us down makes us all look like roses on the way back up. So there's that factor. But baptisms are in here too, so it's not a bad thing. Just to compare us to that other study that I mentioned, they were graphing, and this graph's a lot to take in, but basically attendance all across North America over the last 20 years in all churches, Protestant, Catholic, even Muslim and Baha'i are included in this, a handful of them. Attendance is steadily dropping. And when I compared their criteria for the 4 categories to ours, check it out. Their 2020 versus our 2019 is really close. I would say the headwinds that our church is facing are probably facing just about every church, right? Makes sense. All right. Another question that comes up is, man, none of this would look any good if it wasn't for our Hispanic churches. That is where all our growth is. We wondered, is that true? We know it's not completely wrong, but is it the whole picture? So what I did in 2019, I picked this because it was our last pre-COVID numbers, so it was probably our closest that we had to normal at the time. I separated the Hispanic churches in North America from any that weren't focused on Hispanic. So any others. And so if you notice, out of the Hispanic churches, half of them are in growing versus about a quarter of the others. So there are a lot of healthy Hispanic churches and a higher percentage. What is kind of sobering when you think about this, I was watching a guy doing graphs the other day, and he held up a graph and said 44% of marriages end in divorce. The flip side is 56% end in death. So we looked at this the other way around, and we realized a little more than half of the Hispanic churches are facing plateauing and declining challenges. So what's happening to everybody is still very relevant to Hispanic churches. So there's 2019. Let's see what happened when COVID hit. Both got affected. The Hispanic churches are still looking by percentage a little stronger. And then what I did is I put them together. So to understand this graph, the outside ring is all of North America, Hispanic and everybody else all together. The inner pie is just the Hispanic churches to show you what percent of the total they are. So the Hispanic churches are doing better by percentage, but the good news is if you look at the green ring versus the green pie is not the whole story, is it? The Hispanic churches that are doing well are joined by a lot of other churches that are also doing well. And the same thing in the other parts of the pie. So hopefully, church vitality, you'll see the relevance no matter what group you're working in. I will say that the majority of the growing churches do have a strong immigrant component. We don't have time to dive deeply into that. Here's one last insight I wanted to share with you. We've set these criteria for now over 1-year periods. And so watch what happens. If I take this and reach back 2 years, to be growing, you have to have hit the growing 2 years in a row. If you didn't, you fall back to plateauing. And here's what happened. When we did it over a 2-year period, the growing shrunk considerably. So did the declining. And what we found is churches tend to have cycles, right? And it may have something to do with a 2-year evangelism cycle, and it may just have to do with life and demographics beyond your control. If we do it over a 3-year period, they shrink even more. So the good news is declining really shrunk as well. The bad news is the multiplying and the growing really came down. If you would like to track this for your church, we've already got the component of this that we use to build it available in eAdventist. If you look up your church, there's a tab called Reports, and at the bottom of that, you will see your graph, your numbers for the last, back to 2017. Let me zoom in on it. This happens to be the Puyallup Church here in the Washington Conference. If you look at them, 2020, let's go back to 2017. By attendance, they have a minus. That means they were declining. By baptism, they have a yellow 0, which means they were plateauing, which gives them an overall score on the right of declining. If you go up to the very top, by 2021, their attendance was in the multiplying, their baptism was in the growing, and so overall they were growing. We're going to be adding documentation for this, and you're going to be able, the graphs that I just did, you're going to be able to do for yourself. For now, if you're a conference director, contact me. We'll give you the graphs. We'll also give you a spreadsheet that will show where each of your churches landed, so this summarized. If you need to get in touch with us, help@eadventist.net. Thank you, guys.